Welcome back. Now we just finished creating this item z-curve variable, and we've also created this curve asset in the editor, which is of type float curve, and it looks like this. Now we're ready to set up the code so that we can play a timer and take care of interpolating our item's location during this item interp state. So we need some variables to set this up. Now we're going to have an f vector for the starting location at the time when we start interping. So let's make an f vector called item interp start location. This will be a u property, but this is going to be only visible anywhere. We don't want to be able to set this in the editor or from blueprints, so we'll make it blueprint read only. This will just be set from here in C++. Now I'm going to give it the category item properties and meta allow private access equals true. For the comment, I'm going to say starting location when interping begins. We're also going to want to store the camera target location. That's the location that we're going to fly up to and hover in front of the camera. So we're going to call this f vector camera target location. And we'll give this the same exact u property as item interp start location. So we'll give this a comment and we'll say target interp location in front of the camera. Now we're going to want a boolean to know whether or not we're interping. So we're going to say bool be interping. And we'll give this the same u property as the other variables. Namely, we don't want to be able to set this in blueprints. And we'll give this a comment and say true when interping. Simple. Okay, next we're going to want a timer handle because as soon as we start interping, we're going to want to play a handle and then we'll have a callback function called when we're done interping. So we're going to make an f timer handle and we're going to call this item interp timer. And I'm going to give this a comment and say plays when we start interping, so we have a timer handle. Now we're also going to want a variable to hold a reference to the character. So let's forward declare the aShooter character class. And we're going to call this character, and now we'll have a variable that allows us to access the character class so we can call functions on it. So we're going to make this a u property, and it's going to have the same u property specifiers as the other variables that we just created. Namely, we can't set it from blueprints, but we can see it there. And I'm going to give this a comment and say pointer to the character. That way we can access the character. Now we're also going to need a time for our timer. We need to specify how long we want our timer to run. And this timer is going to run in conjunction with our curve. Here's the curve we created in Unreal Engine. And this curve starts at a time of 0 and it plays out all the way up to a time of 0.7 seconds. So let's create a float and we'll call this z-curve time. And let's give this a u property. But this one I'm going to make edit defaults only. Then we can change this value from within the editor. We'll still make it blueprint read only. And we'll give it the same category and meta specifiers. So I'm going to give this a comment. I'm going to say duration of the curve and timer. So let's give these a little bit of space so they'll be sort of separated from the other variables. Now let's initialize some of these variables here in item.cpp in the constructor. I'm going to initialize z-curve-time, and that's going to be 0.7f because our curve ranged from 0 to 0.7 seconds. And we can initialize item interp start location with a simple f vector initialized with 0.f, and we'll do the same thing for camera target location as well. We'll just initialize that with an f vector of 0.f. And we'll put a little comment here that says item interp variables. Let's also not forget that boolean be interping. We'll set that to a value of false by default as well. Okay, so we've got some variables here and we're ready to start using our interp timer. We're going to create a function that can start the interp timer, and we want this function to be public so the character can call it. Let's take a look at our diagram here. Remember, when our character is looking at an item and tracing and hitting that item with our line trace, then we can hit the E key, and that's going to result in us starting the timer for the item, which means we can get the item to start interpolating according to the curve. So we want a function on item that's public so that our character can call that function and start the interpolation timer. Then we'll also create a function callback for that timer, so when the timer's done, we'll perform some action, such as telling the character, we're done interpolating, go ahead and equip the item. So let's go ahead and create those functions now. First, we'll create a function called startItemCurve, and that's going to be public. So let's put it down here in the public section. It's going to be void, and we'll call this startItemCurve. Now, I want to give this an input parameter of type aShooterCharacter. That's a pointer, and we'll call this char for character. Now, I'm going to go ahead and give this a comment. And I'm going to say called from the aShooterCharacter class. So I can go ahead and create a body for this function. There we go. And also we can create a function callback for when the item interp timer is finished. So we're going to create that up here in the protected section. This will be a void function, and we'll call this finish interping. I'll give this a comment, and we'll say called when item interp timer is finished. And I'll give this a function body as well. Now let's go ahead and implement our startItemCurve function that we just created. So here we are in aItem startItemCurve. Now this is going to be called from the character class, and the character is going to pass in a pointer to itself so that we can have access to the character. Remember, in item.h, we added a private variable called character so that we can store a reference to the character. So let's go ahead and set that here in startItemCurve. So we're going to say character equals char. So I'll make a comment and say store a handle to the character. Now, as soon as we start the item curve, we're going to also want to store the item's location because we created a member variable called itemInterp start location. So let's go ahead and populate that variable. So we're going to say itemInterp start location, and we're just going to call getActor location. So now we'll have the starting location of our item as soon as we start the item curve timer. So let's say store initial location of the item. Now we have this Boolean called bInterping, and we're going to set this to true since we're now going to be interping our location. This line is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to give it a comment. And I'm also going to call setItemState with eItemState, and we're going to set this item to equipInterping. So our item will be in the equipInterping state, and remember, setItemState also calls setItemProperties, which handles all the collision presets for all the components. So we're going to need to remember to update this to handle the equipInterping state. We'll remember to do that shortly. Now finally, what we need to do in startItemCurve is start our timer. We're going to do that by calling getWorldTimerManager, and from the timer manager we're going to call setTimer. Now setTimer has several overloads. We're going to use the overload that takes a timer handle, for which we're going to use itemInterpTimer. It also takes a user class. We're going to use this, and then it needs a callback function. We're going to use aItemFinishInterping. And finally, it needs a time, and we used zCurveTime, which we initialized to 0.7 seconds. So startItemCurve sets these variables and then calls setTimer and starts our timer setting our callback to be finish interping, which will be called at the end of this curve time, which will be 0.7 seconds. Now, what's going to happen in finish interping? Well, remember, in shooter character, we created a public function called getPickUpItem, in which we can pass in an A item. So the shooter character class can handle the item however it wants. So in item.cpp in finish interping, all we need to do is call that function since we have a reference to the character. So let's go to our finish interping function. And here in finish interping, all we need to do is first check to see if character is valid. And if so, we can call the character's function getPickUpItem. And getPickUpItem takes an A item, and we can just pass in this. And then the character will handle it from there. Okay, so this will conclude this video. To recap, we added some variables into the item class. We now have the item interp start location and camera target location. We initialize item interp start location in our new function called start item curve. We also created a Boolean called bInterping for when we're interpolating. And we now have an item interp timer and a float called zCurveTime associated with that timer. We also start this timer in start item curve by calling getWorldTimerManager and calling the setTimer function using our new item interp timer and our zCurveTime. We also created a callback function called finishInterping, which will be called at the end of our item interp timer. We created an A shooter character pointer called character, which we set in start item curve. In our finish interping function, we simply get the character, check to see if it's valid, and then we call getPickUpItem on the character, passing in this as the parameter. In start item curve, we also set bInterping to true and call setItemState, so our item state is now EIS equipInterping. SetItemState sets the item state member to true and also setItemProperties, which is designed to handle collision presets and other properties. So we need to remember to handle those in setItemProperties. We'll do that in the next video. So we'll see you then.